I Am Not a Number, written by Kathy Kaser and Jenny K. Dupuis, illustrated by Jillian Newland. When Irene is removed from her First Nations family to live in a residential school, she is confused, frightened, and terribly homesick. I am not a number. The dark figure, backlit by the sun, filled the doorway of our home on Nipissing Reserve Number 10. I'm here for the children, the shadowy giant said, pointing a long finger at me. You, how old? I shrank behind my mother. Here for the children. How old? He repeated. 8. The whisper floated from my mouth. The Indian agent marched into our house and approached my father. You knew I would come, Ernest, he said. The children are going with me to the residential school. They are wards of the government now. They belong to us. Not Irene. She needs to be with her family. My mother wrapped her arms around me. I won't let you take her. The man shrugged. Give me all 3, or you'll be fined or sent to jail. We have no choice, Marianne, my father replied, sounding defeated. It was only a matter of time before they came for the children. Fear rose inside me, filling my throat. My brothers George and Ephraim stood with their heads bowed low. Are they as scared as I am? I wondered. My other brothers and sisters, those too young and too old to be taken, huddled together watching. My father pulled my 2 brothers and me into a semicircle before him. This man will take you to live in a school far from here, he said, in his soft, calm voice. We don't want to let you go, but it's the law. We have to. But why are you letting him take us? I cried, pulling away. Father's hands trembled and tears pooled in his eyes. My loving father, chief of the community, strong and wise, turned away without answering. Hurry up! The Indian agent was becoming impatient. My mother gathered food into 3 small packets. Something for the journey, she explained, as the Indian agent tapped his watch. Mom, I asked, are you coming with us? She shook her head. But who will look after me? I cried. There will be teachers and nuns, my mother said. You will learn many things at this school. Something in her voice, a quiver, a hesitation, made me doubt that this was true. My dread turned to panic. I don't want to leave you, I whispered. My mother pulled me up against her, and I buried my face in the folds of her dress, pressing her tighter until there was no air between us. I couldn't let go. The Indian agent opened the door and motioned for us to come. Mom pried my arms from around her back and kissed the top of my head. I grabbed the back of George's jacket and stumbled after him as he stepped toward the door. At least I had my brothers with me. I made a silent vow that we would stay together. As we walked into the sunlight toward the waiting bus, my mother ran forward. Look after each other, she cried. Never forget home or our ways. Never forget us. Never forget who you are. I turned one last time and gazed at her through blurry tears. How could I possibly forget my parents? How could I forget who I was? But then, how could I possibly guess what awaited me at the residential school? Girls, follow me. Boys, you will be going to a separate building. A tall nun named Sister Mary stood at the entrance of the imposing brick building. My heart sank into my stomach as the boys were led away. No chance for goodbyes. The tiny spark of safety I had felt in being with my brothers flickered and died. I turned back to face Sister Mary, feeling more alone than ever. My name is Irene Cooch, I told her. My voice was small, but I held my head high and clasped my hands together so that no one can see they were shaking. Sister Mary's eyes narrowed into slits. We don't use names here. All students are known by numbers. You are 759. I am not a number. I am Irene Cooch, daughter of Ernest and Mary Cooch. I will never forget who I am. I was hurried into the showers with the other girls who had arrived with me. We stood in a group as icy water pricked our bodies. Sister Mary hovered over us. Make sure to scrub all the brown off. She must like lighter-skinned girls better, someone next to me whispered. I stared at my dark arms while Sister Mary scrubbed them with foul-smelling soap. After I was dry, she handed me a plain gray dress, knitted stockings, and a pair of black leather shoes. Dressed in my new uniform, I was taken to a small room and ordered to sit on a low stool. The worst was still to come. Sister Mary wrapped the cape around my neck. Now let's get rid of that hair. Sit up straight, she ordered. Her scissors chewed through my long black hair, and I watched my locks fall in a pool around me. This meant much more to me than a haircut, though I could never explain that to Sister Mary. Back home, long hair was a source of pride. We cut it when we lost a loved one. Now it felt as if a part of me was dying with every strand that fell. Several days later, I sat with the other girls at a long wooden table, staring at a bowl of porridge in front of me. It was gray and lumpy and looked like the plaster my father had once used to fill some cracks in our wall. Next to the porridge was a piece of stale white bread. I thought of my mom's freshly baked loaves and homemade strawberry rhubarb jam. Back home, we never had much, but we were never hungry. Here, my stomach gurgled, calling out for food. Eat! Sister Mary's stern voice cut into my thoughts. I forced some bitter, gritty mush down my throat. The smell nearly made me gag, but I remembered the warnings of the other girls. If you don't eat your meal at breakfast, they will serve it to you for lunch. And if you throw it up, you will have to eat the vomit. I raised spoonful after spoonful to my mouth and willed myself to keep it down. I'm so hungry, the girl opposite me groaned. I broke off a piece of the bread and leaned across the table. Here, I said, I don't want this. She smiled and reached for it gratefully. Miigwech Galen, I whispered back. I didn't see Sister Mary until she was almost on top of me. Thwack! A big wooden spoon came down hard across my shoulders. I yelped in pain. That's the devil's language, she shouted. We don't speak it here. She grabbed my arm and hauled me up the stairs. Sister Mary's strides were long and fast, and I stumbled behind her, trying not to fall. I had seen other girls pulled along like this. Lessons. That's what the sisters called it when one of us needed reminding about the rules. I was terrified of what awaited me in the room at the end of the hallway. Sister Mary shoved me into a chair and turned away to fill a bedpan with hot coals from the stove. Show me your hands, she said. Please don't hurt me, I whispered. Show me, she demanded. There was no escape. Slowly, I extended my arms straight out as Sister Mary lowered the hot bedpan onto my skin. I wanted to scream. Instead, I dug my teeth into my lower lip and squeezed my eyes shut as tightly as I could, counting the seconds until the sister lifted the pain. That'll teach you to speak English here. You should be ashamed of yourself. With that, she walked away. I blew gently on the red welts that had bloomed down my arms. Ashamed? I wasn't ashamed of my language. I was proud of it. But everything I knew and loved about who I was and where I had come from was slowly being taken away. Mother's last words, "Never forget who you are," rang in my ears. "I am Irene Cooch. I'm trying to remember," I whispered as tears streamed down my face. A couple of weeks later, I was in the chapel for early Mass, as I was every morning and twice on Sundays. "If you memorize the songs and pray a lot, you will go to heaven," the sisters told us. I didn't mind chapel. It was better than hauling firewood to feed the school's hungry furnace, or mending worn clothes that were piled in the sewing room. Sister Elizabeth sat next to me and squeezed my hand. She was kinder than most of the nuns. Once she gave me a piece of juicy steak and leftover potato when I was helping to clear away the hearty meal that the sisters and teachers had eaten. I returned her smile and then searched the pews on the other side of the chapel, trying to find Ephraim and George. Because boys and girls were separated, chapel was the only place where I could see them. Ephraim looked my way. He was pale. "Are you okay?" I raised my eyes, silently asking the question. He nodded slightly and then leaned forward in his seat as if he were asking about me. I closed my eyes in response. My arms were still tender, and even though the red sores had now turned pink, the memory of the punishment had not faded one bit. I knelt on the pew, troubled. Why are we treated so cruelly? Why must I change everything about myself? While I sang the songs and prayed out loud, I secretly begged God to let me return to my family. Days, weeks, and months limped along, drearier than a never-ending storm. Up at 6 a.m., prayers, porridge, chores, studies. But the gloom of each day was better than the fear of punishment. I dreamed of being back on the reserve where I could play with my brothers, sisters, and cousins. I wanted to hear the song of the meadowlarks in the grasslands. I yearned to spread my arms wide as if I were ready to soar, like them. I longed to fly away, but for me there was no escape. Just as I was beginning to believe that my time at the school would never end, an announcement was made that lifted my spirit. We were going home for the summer. Home. I hadn't said that word for so long. Would my house look the same? Would my parents know me? I had not heard from them all year, hadn't been allowed to write or receive letters. "It's evil out there," Sister Mary told us. "We can't have you mixing with the outside world." But everyone knew the nuns were afraid that our families would learn how we were being treated. When I saw my parents standing in front of our house, I knew that home was as it had always been. Mother rushed to greet us and nearly pulled me off my feet as she wrapped her arms around me. My father squeezed my cheeks. "I've thought about you every day," he whispered. "I never forgot you," I replied. "I never forgot who I am." Dad smiled and bent his forehead to touch mine. That evening we sat down to a feast of meat pies and fried pickerel. Wanting us to take as much food as we liked, Mother urged us, saying, "Gedan, Gedan." I piled extra fish onto my plate, realizing that I had not heard my Ojibwe language spoken in nearly a year. "Miigwech," I replied. The words I knew so well felt strange in my mouth. But at night, when I put my head upon my pillow, I was haunted by images of Sister Mary chasing me down a long hallway with a leather strap in her hand. I bolted awake and tried to stop my heart from pounding. Finally, I got out of bed and sat by the open window, where the familiar sound of water lapping up on the lake shore calmed my breathing. But the nightmares did not end there. I knew that all too quickly the leaves would turn from green to bright red and orange, signaling the time when the living nightmare of that horrible place would be upon me. End of part 1.